Hey everyone, I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I glanced over, expecting nothing out of the ordinary. We all have our routines, our little digital distractions, texts, emails, some nonsense from a group chat. But something about the way Ashley's hand shot out, fingers clenched around the phone, told me this wasn't just some ordinary notification. She smiled, too wide and too quick, the kind of smile you practice when you're trying to hide something. "Work stuff," she baldered, too casually, swiping the screen clean with a flick of her thumb before tucking the phone back into her pocket. I let it slide, or at least I told myself I did. It was nothing, right? But that smile, the speed of it, the way her body moved in just the slightest defensive shift, it burrowed into me like a splinter you can't dig out. By the time she had left for her yoga class, the house was quiet except for the low hum of the fridge. But my mind was racing. Maybe it's stupid, but I've always been the guy who trusts his gut. It's served me well, in work and in life. And today, my gut had something to say. Something's wrong. I stood there in the empty kitchen, staring at the spot where Ashley had just been. The woman I'd loved for 10 years, the woman I'd married thinking I knew her better than anyone in this world. Why did I suddenly feel like I didn't know her at all? I shook it off. Maybe I was reading too much into things. But as the days passed, that unease grew like a shadow stretching across every corner of my life. It wasn't just the phone. It was little things. Her schedule, suddenly unpredictable. The way she'd brush off my questions about her day with half-hearted answers, always quick to change the subject. And then there were those glances during our neighborhood BBQs, the kind you can't quite put your finger on, but you feel deep in your gut. At the last one, I watched as Ethan, our next-door neighbor, cracked a joke that wasn't even funny. Ashley laughed too hard, way too hard. I caught her elbow brush against his arm when she reached for her drink. It wasn't some blatant in-your-face flirtation. No, it was subtle. A shift in body language, a tone of voice too familiar, too comfortable. Like something private existed between them, something that cut me out of the conversation even though I was standing right there. That night, after everyone had gone home, I replayed every moment in my head while Ashley slept beside me, her breathing soft and even. Am I crazy? I kept asking myself. Am I reading too much into this? But once you see a crack, no matter how small, it's all you can focus on. The next morning, when I asked her casually about Ethan, how often they chatted during the day, she didn't meet my eyes. "Not much," she said, turning away to grab her coffee. But her voice? It was tight, controlled, like she was navigating a minefield. That same gut feeling rose up inside me, and this time, I wasn't about to ignore it. Work was the one place I could lose myself, where I had control. As a construction supervisor, everything followed rules, order, and logic. Blueprints don't lie. Walls go up according to plan. If something's out of place, you fix it. Simple. But my life at home? It wasn't a blueprint anymore. It was chaos wrapped in silence, thick with suspicion I couldn't shake. I kept going back to the BBQ, running over every interaction between Ashley and Ethan, every stolen glance, every laugh that lingered too long. Maybe it wasn't just in my head. Maybe it was there, right in front of me, and I'd just been too blind to see it. Days passed. I watched her more closely now. I wasn't the jealous type, never had been, but this was different. It wasn't just jealousy. It was something deeper, something primal. Doubt had dug itself into my chest, tightening like a vice every time she walked out the door, without saying where she was going or who she'd be with. I started paying attention to the things I used to ignore. The texts she never let me see, the way her phone was always face down when she set it on the counter, the times she'd say she was running late from work but wouldn't offer any details. It wasn't that she was lying, not yet. But the gaps, the omissions, they were growing wider by the day, and I could feel myself slipping further into a state of constant unease. One night, lying in bed next to her, I reached out instinctively, my hand resting on her hip like it always did. She stiffened. The kind of small, barely perceptible movement that most people would miss. But I didn't miss it. Not this time. I left my hand there for a moment longer, feeling the distance between us grow. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind wouldn't stop replaying everything. Her phone, her laughter at the BBQ, her quick exits from conversations whenever I asked too much about Ethan. I started thinking about Ethan differently too. He was the kind of guy people liked right away, charming, always knew the right thing to say, the right joke to make, the one who'd walk into a room and own it. I had never felt threatened by him before. Why would I? I had a good life. I had Ashley. We had something solid, or so I thought. But now all I could think about was that smirk he wore like it was his birthright, that casual confidence, and that damn laugh. One afternoon, we were out for a walk through the neighborhood. It was one of those moments that should have felt good. Us, together, the leaves just starting to turn, the air crisp. But my mind was miles away. And when we passed by Ethan's house, I noticed the way her eyes lingered a second too long. Just a second, but enough to tell me everything I needed to know. "You ever see him around during the day?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Who?" she asked, playing dumb. "You know who, Ethan." She gave a shrug, that same tight smile from before. "Sometimes." "He works from home, doesn't he?" It was a harmless enough answer, but there was something behind it. A flicker of something she didn't want me to see. And just like that, the suspicion I had been trying to bury broke through the surface, sharp and suffocating. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I found myself sitting in the kitchen, staring at her phone. It was face down again, like it always was. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. The truth wasn't in the phone, at least not yet. The truth was already here, clawing its way into every corner of my mind. Ashley wasn't just distracted. She wasn't just busy. She was hiding something. And I was damn sure going to find out what. By the end of that week, I was different. There was no denying it now. Every interaction with Ashley felt like walking on glass. Every laugh at the dinner table felt forced. She could tell something had shifted between us, but she wasn't asking why. Maybe she already knew the answer. The tension had woven itself into everything, this quiet storm brewing under the surface of our life, ready to break at any moment. I didn't have proof yet, but I could feel it, that crack widening with every passing day. In the back of my mind, a plan was forming. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. That would be too easy, too emotional. I wasn't some fool who was going to scream and throw things, begging for the truth. No. I'd wait, I'd watch. And when I had the truth, when I had the undeniable, irrefutable evidence, I'd make my move. And when I did, it wouldn't just be Ashley who paid for this. It would be both of them. I couldn't take it anymore. The uncertainty was driving me mad. Every glance, every word between Ashley and Ethan became a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. And maybe that was the problem. None of this was fitting together the way it should. Our lives had a rhythm, a structure I could count on, like the houses I built. But now it was all jagged edges and missing parts. The thought came to me in the middle of the night as I lay there next to her, staring at the ceiling. What if I was imagining it? What if all of this was in my head? The doubts, the suspicion. What if I was the one driving myself into the ground? I rolled over to face her, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest, listening to the rhythmic sound of her breathing. How could she look so peaceful while my world was tearing at the seams? I wanted to shake her awake, demand she tell me everything, explain the way she was slipping away from me. But no, not yet. I knew I had to be careful. I'd been building this up for weeks now, scrutinizing every move she made, every glance Ethan threw her way. I couldn't accuse her without proof. Not with Ashley. She was too smart for that, too calculated. If I made a move too soon, she'd twist it around, make me the bad guy for even doubting her. That's who she was. She always knew how to spin things, make herself the victim, the one wronged. And Ethan? He'd probably just sit there with that smug look, laughing behind my back. No, I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I started paying closer attention, especially to her routine. The things that used to be normal now seemed suspicious. She would leave for her yoga classes more often than before, always with a vague excuse about needing extra time to herself. Her phone, once left on the kitchen counter, was now always in her hand, locked away. At night, she'd turn it face down beside the bed like some kind of shield. I caught glimpses of her texting sometimes. The quick flick of her fingers across the screen, then the equally fast exit from the message app when she noticed me nearby. "Who are you talking to?" I'd ask, casual testing the waters. "Work stuff," she'd say. Same smile, same lie. I didn't press it. Not then, but my mind was already racing, making connections I hadn't noticed before. Little things, a late meeting here, a long lunch there, and Ethan, I started seeing him everywhere. His car was parked in front of the house more often. His voice would carry through the open windows during the day when I was home. He was around too much, always too available. One day I decided to confront her, gently, casually. I asked about her day, about the yoga classes. She was evasive, giving me half-truths wrapped in quick smiles, the kind designed to make me drop it. But I didn't drop it. "You've been spending a lot of time with Ethan," I said, keeping my tone neutral, like I wasn't accusing her of anything. She didn't flinch, but there was a pause. The kind that lasted just a second too long. "Ethan?" she repeated as if the name was unfamiliar. "No, not really. I mean, we see each other around the neighborhood. Why?" "I don't know. Just feels like you two have been close lately. People talk." That got her attention. Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. "People talk?" She gave a forced laugh. "Michael, you know this neighborhood. People are always gossiping." She was deflecting. I knew her tricks too well. "Is that all it is, gossip?" She straightened, her voice sharpening. "Are you accusing me of something?" "No," I lied. "Just asking." The tension hung between us, thick and suffocating. She stood up, grabbing her phone off the table and walking into the kitchen without another word. But that pause, that hesitation, it was all I needed to know I wasn't wrong. Something was happening. I started tracking her movements. Not officially, I wasn't some obsessive stalker, or at least I didn't want to think of myself that way. But I watched. I noticed the details. The time she left the house, where she said she was going, and when she came back. There were gaps, small but enough to set my teeth on edge. I knew what I had to do. One night after she had fallen asleep, I took her phone. I wasn't proud of it. It felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But what choice did I have? I wasn't going to be blindsided in my own home. If she was hiding something, I needed to know. The phone was locked, of course, but I knew her password. I hesitated, staring at the screen, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. What if I was wrong? What if I found nothing? Would that make me the bad guy? But if I didn't do this, I knew I'd drive myself insane. The moment I unlocked it, my stomach dropped. She wasn't even hiding it that well. Her messages with Ethan were there, clear as day, under the guise of harmless conversation. But I knew better. I could read between the lines. There were jokes, little inside references I didn't recognize, pictures of them laughing at some stupid neighborhood event I hadn't been invited to. It wasn't overt, but it was enough to confirm everything I had been fearing. I scrolled deeper, finding more messages. One stood out, a photo she'd sent to him, a picture of her in a new dress she'd bought, posing in front of the mirror. "What do you think?" she'd written. His reply, "You look incredible. Wish I was there to see it in person." My hands tightened around the phone. My mind went blank for a second, just the roaring sound of betrayal in my ears. It was like a punch to the gut, but there was no pain, just a hollow, empty space where my trust had been. I didn't need to read more. I had enough. The next day I called off work early. Something inside me told me this was the day. She thought I was on site all afternoon. She had no idea I was coming back. I pulled into the driveway, turning off the engine, sitting there for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. Her car was in the garage. She was home. And so was Ethan, judging by the unfamiliar car parked on the street. I didn't storm in. That would have been too easy, too predictable. I stepped out of the car quietly, closing the door without a sound. The house was silent as I entered, the kind of silence that blankets everything when something's wrong. I moved upstairs slowly, my footsteps barely audible on the carpeted stairs. My heart was beating so loud I was sure they could hear it. And then I heard them, soft laughter, a quiet conversation coming from behind the bedroom door. I stopped. My hand hovered just inches from the doorknob. Every instinct in me screamed to throw the door open, to confront them, to let the rage take over, but I didn't. I stood there listening, hearing them talk, laugh, share moments that weren't theirs to share. They were in my space, in my life, as if I didn't exist. I leaned in, the door slightly ajar. I could see them, sitting on the edge of the bed, their bodies too close, her hand resting on his arm. They didn't notice me. They were wrapped up in each other, too lost in whatever twisted connection they'd built. I watched for a minute longer than I should have. Long enough to burn the image into my mind, long enough to feel the weight of everything come crashing down. It was surreal, like watching someone else's life fall apart. But it was mine. I backed away, moving as silently as I had come. The front door clicked shut behind me, and I sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My head was spinning, not with anger, but with calculating clarity. I wasn't going to confront them. Not yet. That would be too easy, too satisfying for them. No, I had to be smarter than that. They had humiliated me, betrayed me, turned my life into some kind of sick joke. I wasn't going to let them walk away from this unscathed. I wasn't going to lose everything while they kept on laughing behind my back. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was war, and I was going to win. I pulled away from the house, my mind already racing with possibilities. The evidence I had was enough to destroy them both, but I needed more. I needed to make sure when they fell hard. Ashley wasn't going to see it coming. Neither was Ethan. They had no idea who they were messing with. As I drove away, my mind was buzzing with plans. There was no turning back now. I spent the next few days in a numb haze, playing the part of a man still tethered to his daily life, while inside, everything was falling apart. At work, my hands moved on autopilot, directing crews, checking blueprints, making decisions, but my mind was somewhere else, running through every memory of my marriage with Ashley, replaying every conversation, every touch, every glance that felt wrong in hindsight. What had I missed? How long had I been blind? It wasn't enough to know she was sleeping with Ethan. I needed to know how far it went. When had it started? What were they saying behind my back? And most importantly, what were they planning? Did they think I was a fool? A pawn in some twisted little game they could play behind my back while still keeping me around for the heavy lifting? I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. That would be a mistake, too impulsive. Instead, I watched carefully, closely, gathering the pieces before I made my move. I studied her habits like I was breaking down a job site. When she left, when she came home, what she said, and how she said it. I'd started reading between the lines, searching for the meaning behind every smile, every excuse. The distance between us was growing, but she didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she didn't care. We still ate dinner together, still shared a bed. But the space between us at the table felt like miles. I'd watch her across the room, seeing someone I thought I knew, now a stranger who shared my home. She smiled the same way, used the same casual phrases like she always had, but every word felt rehearsed, like she was wearing a mask I hadn't noticed until now. There were times when I'd catch her on her phone smiling at something she wouldn't show me. I didn't ask who it was anymore. I didn't need to. I knew. Every evening I would sit on the couch after she went upstairs, running over what I'd found in her messages with Ethan. I couldn't look at them too often. It hurt too much, and every time I did, I felt something hollow out inside me. But I knew I needed more. I needed to know the extent of what they'd done, how deep they'd gone. I started following her, casually at first. I knew her routine, the places she went, the gym, her favorite coffee shop, the errands that she ran. But now I was looking for something different, something that would confirm what I already knew in my gut. It didn't take long. 2 days after I'd seen them together in our bedroom, I followed her to a spot just outside of town. It wasn't a coffee shop or the grocery store. It was a cheap, off-the-radar motel. I parked far enough away that she wouldn't see me, my pulse hammering in my throat as I watched her climb out of her car and head inside. 15 minutes later, Ethan's car pulled up, and he walked through the same door. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight I thought it might snap. I could feel my jaw clench as I stared at the motel door. This was it. This was the proof, the final nail in the coffin of whatever we had once shared. There was no escaping it now. But again, I didn't confront them. Not yet. I wasn't ready. I was building something bigger than a one-time blow-up. I wanted this to be permanent, something that would destroy their lives in the way they'd wrecked mine. I couldn't just fly off the handle and let my emotions take over. I needed to play this smart to make sure when I pulled the rug out from under them, they had nothing left to stand on. When I got back home, I started gathering everything, every piece of evidence, every bit of information. I knew I could break them apart, but it had to be more than just public shame. I wanted Ethan to feel the same collapse, to have his life implode the way mine had. That's when things got complicated. A few days after the motel, I got a message from someone I hadn't expected. Sarah, Ethan's wife. We weren't close, just neighbors who exchanged the occasional pleasantry. I hadn't given much thought to how she fit into all of this, but as I stared at the message on my phone, I realized that she was the key to making this whole thing work. "Michael, can we talk?" her message said. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the screen. What did she want? Did she know? Was she onto something? We met at a local diner the next evening. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were rimmed with dark circles, and her hands fidgeted with the edges of her coffee cup. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice low, careful. "I know this might sound crazy, but do you think something's going on between Ethan and Ashley?" I didn't flinch. I knew how to keep my face neutral when I needed to. "Why would you think that?" Sarah sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know, it's just, he's been acting weird, distracted. His phone's always going off, and when I ask him, he says it's nothing. But I've seen the way he looks at her during those neighborhood get-togethers. And," she trailed off, shaking her head, "I think I'm losing him, Michael. I think he's with her." I could feel the pieces falling into place, the gears in my mind turning faster. Sarah was already suspicious, already on the verge of finding out the truth. This was perfect. "I've noticed some things too," I said, my voice calm, controlled. "I'm not sure what's going on, but you're not crazy for thinking something's off." She nodded, looking down at her cup. I didn't want to believe it, but it's there, isn't it? I'm not imagining this. "No," I said softly. "You're not imagining it." I watched her face crumble slightly, the realization hitting her like a slow-moving train. This was her life too, her marriage falling apart in front of her eyes, just like mine. She had been blindsided, just like I had been. But the difference was I was already planning my next move, and now Sarah was part of the equation. "I think we need to find out for sure," I said. "If you want, I can help." Her eyes met mine, a mix of desperation and hope flickering across her face. "How?" "We watch. We gather evidence." I've already started. I didn't tell her everything, not yet. I wasn't ready to reveal how far I'd gone, but I could see she was willing to be a part of this. If they're doing this to us, they're going to slip up. We just need to be ready when they do. Sarah nodded, a small flicker of determination in her eyes. "I want to know the truth, Michael, whatever it takes." And that's when I knew. I had her on my side now. Ethan wasn't just going to lose his lover, he was going to lose his wife too. This wasn't just about humiliating them anymore. This was about taking everything from them, piece by piece. Over the next few days, I refined my plan. I wasn't going to confront them directly, not yet. That would be too easy, too quick. I wanted to ruin their lives slowly, methodically. I had to think beyond just the affair. I needed to go deeper. I started digging into Ethan's business. It didn't take long to find some questionable practices, shady deals, invoices that didn't add up, clients who had quietly complained about being overcharged. Ethan was cocky, but he wasn't as clean as he pretended to be. I documented everything, made notes, and began laying the groundwork for my next move. But first, I had to hit them where it hurt, publicly. I waited until the neighborhood was buzzing with gossip. The timing was perfect. There was a community event coming up, and everyone would be there. I'd been quiet, blending into the background, not giving anyone any reason to suspect what I was planning. When the time was right, I leaked the photos. Just a few, enough to spark a fire, but not enough to burn it all down just yet. I posted them anonymously on the neighborhood's social media page. Pictures of Ashley and Ethan together laughing, a little too close for comfort. It didn't take long for the comments to roll in, the gossip to start spreading like wildfire. People loved a good scandal. And this was exactly what they had been waiting for. By the time the community event rolled around, the whispers were everywhere. I watched from the sidelines as Ashley and Ethan tried to play it cool, but I could see the tension in their faces, the way they avoided eye contact with everyone. The cracks were starting to show, but this was just the beginning. As the night wore on, I caught Sarah's eye from across the room. She gave me a small nod, her expression grim but resolute. She knew what was happening. She knew the first strike had landed, and now it was time for the rest of the plan to unfold. When they fell, they wouldn't get back up. The day after the community event, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was early, the sun just starting to break through the blinds, but the notifications were relentless. My hand hovered over the phone for a moment before I picked it up. The neighborhood social media page was on fire. Photos of Ashley and Ethan, together laughing, too close, had sparked a frenzy. Comment after comment poured in, speculating, accusing, gossiping. A couple of neighbors even tagged Ashley directly, subtly trying to bait a response. The talk was spreading faster than I had expected. People were already making assumptions. The two of them were already guilty in the eyes of everyone who mattered in this tiny, tight-knit community. I scrolled through the comments, feeling a hollow satisfaction in watching the destruction unfold, watching the perfect image they had crafted start to crack. But it wasn't enough. This was just the first move. I needed to make sure the whispers turned into full-blown ruin. Ashley was still asleep when I slipped out of bed and headed downstairs. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the next phase of the plan. The public embarrassment was working, but I had to push harder, twist the knife a little deeper. I wasn't satisfied with just watching them squirm. I wanted them to feel the same suffocating pressure I had felt, the weight of their actions closing in on them from every angle. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Sarah. "Michael." Her voice was shaky, almost breathless. "Have you seen it? The photos?" "Yeah, I've seen them," I replied, my tone steady. "They're all over the neighborhood page. Everyone's talking about it. Ethan, he tried to lie about it, said it was just gossip, but I can see it in his eyes. He's panicking." Her voice wavered, and I could hear the hurt underneath the surface. "What do we do now?" I paused, considering my next words carefully. Sarah was a useful ally, but she didn't know the full extent of what I was planning. "We let it play out. They're feeling the pressure now, and it's only going to get worse. Don't confront him yet. Let them stew in it." She was quiet for a moment before she whispered, "You're right. I'll wait." I hung up, feeling a strange mixture of control and detachment. Sarah was unraveling, and soon so would Ethan and Ashley. But I couldn't stop there. I had to keep the momentum going. Later that morning, Ethan showed up at my front door. I wasn't surprised. I'd seen his car pull up, heard his heavy footsteps on the porch. I could feel the rage coming off him even before I opened the door. When I did, there he stood, fists clenched at his sides, His face flushed red with anger. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tight, barely controlled. I stepped aside, letting him in. He stalked past me into the living room, like he owned the place. I followed him in, closing the door behind me. "What the hell are you trying to do?" he spat, spinning around to face me. "Those pictures, what is this? Some kind of sick joke?" I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, keeping my face neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb, Michael." He took a step closer, his jaw clenched. "This is about Ashley, isn't it? You're trying to make me look bad. Spread lies about me. You're trying to turn everyone against us." "Lies?" I raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" His eyes flickered with uncertainty, and for a moment, I saw a crack in his arrogant facade. He had been so sure of himself, so smug in his affair with my wife, but now the world around him was starting to close in. He was scrambling, trying to regain control, but it was slipping through his fingers. "You think you can embarrass me? Ruin me?" he hissed. "You're pathetic, Michael. You don't have the balls to confront me directly, so you hide behind some stupid photos and gossip." I pushed off the wall, stepping closer until we were eye to eye. "You've already ruined yourself, Ethan. I'm just giving everyone else a front row seat to watch it happen." He stared at me for a long moment, his breath heavy, nostrils flaring. Then with a frustrated growl, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I stood there listening to the sound of his car engine rev as he peeled out of the driveway. The confrontation had gone exactly as I had expected. Ethan was unraveling, but he didn't know how far I was willing to go. The photos were just the beginning. Ashley, on the other hand, hadn't come to me yet. I expected her to play it differently, to try and smooth things over, manipulate her way out of this. She was smart like that, always knew how to turn the tables and make herself the victim. But this time, there was no way out for her. The whispers continued for the next couple of days, and by the middle of the week, Ashley finally cracked. She cornered me in the kitchen one evening, her eyes red and swollen from crying, her voice trembling with desperation. "Michael, please," she started, her hands shaking as she reached out to touch my arm. "We need to talk. This isn't what it looks like." I looked down at her hand, then back at her face. "Isn't it?" She blinked, her breath hitching in her throat. I made a mistake, okay? A mistake?" I cut her off, my voice cold, devoid of emotion. "You think this is a mistake?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she took a step back, dropping her hand. "I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you, Michael. I love you." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "You love me? Really?" I shook my head, stepping away from her. "You don't get to say that, not after everything." I was confused, okay? I didn't know what I wanted, but it's over now. I swear it's over. She was pleading now, her voice breaking. "We can fix this. Please, we can fix this." I stared at her, feeling nothing. No anger, no sadness, just an empty void where my trust had once been. "There's nothing left to fix, Ashley." Her face crumpled, and she sank into one of the kitchen chairs, burying her face in her hands. The sight of her like that, broken, desperate, it should have made me feel something, but it didn't. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her there alone. But the plan wasn't finished. I still had one final move to make. I'd spent the last few weeks quietly gathering information on Ethan's business, finding every little piece of dirt I could use to completely destroy him. The man had been careless, cocky. His financials were a mess, full of shady deals and under-the-table transactions that would make the IRS salivate. I compiled everything, emails, documents, financial statements, and sent it anonymously to the authorities. It didn't take long for them to act. A few days later, I saw 2 unmarked cars parked outside Ethan's house. I watched from my living room window as officers escorted him out, his hands cuffed behind his back. The neighborhood was buzzing again, only this time it wasn't just about an affair. Ethan's entire world was crumbling. His reputation, his business, his freedom. He wasn't just a cheater now. He was a criminal. Ashley didn't say much after that. She knew it was over. Her social standing in the neighborhood had plummeted, and she was a pariah in the community she once ruled over with ease. People whispered behind her back, avoided eye contact when she walked by. She was trapped in a world she could no longer control, and it was everything I had wanted. But as I stood there watching Ethan being driven away in the back of a squad car, I felt an odd sense of hollowness settle in. I had won. I had destroyed them both. But something was missing. Was this it? Was this how I was supposed to feel after getting my revenge? I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew one thing: it was time to let go, time to move on from the wreckage I had created. I wasn't going to be trapped in this anymore, not like them. Later that night, I sat in the quiet of my living room, staring out at the dark street, the weight of everything settling over me. I had won. But the kitaman, that was something I hadn't fully considered. The next neighborhood gathering was just around the corner, and everyone would be there. It wasn't the usual casual affair this time. There was a tension in the air, something unspoken but heavy. The gossip about Ashley and Ethan had reached every corner of our small, gossipy community, but nobody dared to talk openly about it. People were waiting, watching, wondering when the next shoe would drop. I knew it was time. I arrived a little late, blending into the crowd as conversations buzzed around me. People glanced my way, their whispers quieting for a second before they resumed their idle chatter. Ashley stood near the drinks table, nervously fidgeting with a glass of wine. Her eyes darted around, trying to gauge where the next judgmental look would come from. Ethan wasn't far away, talking to some of the men, but I could see the strain in his forced laughter. The arrogant swagger he once carried had started to crack under the weight of everything unraveling. I kept my distance, watching them both. There was a cruel satisfaction in seeing how far they'd fallen, how the walls they'd built to hide their affair were crumbling faster than they could patch them up. The whispers, the side glances, the avoidance, it was all working. But this night was for more than that. I wasn't there to revel in quiet destruction. I was there to burn it all down. Sarah was in the corner, her eyes red and tired. I had spoken to her earlier, told her to be ready for what was coming. She didn't say much, just nodded, understanding the storm that was about to break. I wasn't sure how much she knew, how much she had pieced together, but it didn't matter anymore. Tonight I would lay everything out in the open. I took a deep breath and walked to the center of the room. Conversations quieted and eyes turned toward me. I could feel the collective tension building, the subtle shift in the air as everyone realized something was about to happen. Ashley spotted me first, her face paling as she took a step back. Ethan caught on a second later, his smile faltering, his eyes narrowing as he realized I wasn't just there to drink and pretend like nothing was wrong. I cleared my throat, loud enough for the entire room to hear. I think it's time we all stop pretending. The chatter stopped completely, the silence deafening. Every pair of eyes was on me now. I could feel their curiosity, their need for drama. They wanted the truth, and I was going to give it to them. Some of you might have heard the rumors, I continued, my voice calm, controlled, and maybe some of you already know what's been going on. But I think it's time we clear up any confusion. I turned to Ashley, who stood frozen, her glass trembling in her hand. Ashley, do you want to explain to everyone what's been happening behind my back? Or should I? Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, but there was none. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The color drained from her face as I reached into my jacket and pulled out a stack of printed photos. The same photos I'd leaked online, only these were clearer, more damning. I held them up for everyone to see. These, I said, my voice cutting through the silence, are pictures of my wife and our neighbor, Ethan, together. More than friends, more than neighbors. Gasps rippled through the crowd and Ethan stiffened, his face hardening as he realized where this was going. He stepped forward, his voice low, threatening. Michael, that's enough. But I wasn't done. I turned my attention to Ethan, meeting his glare head on. Oh, I'm just getting started. You see, Ethan, this isn't just about the affair. It's about everything you've tried to hide. Your business, your lies, the way you've cheated not just on your wife, but everyone around you. I could see the shock ripple through the room, confusion mixing with intrigue. People loved a good scandal, but this was turning into something much darker, much deeper than they had anticipated. You think you're untouchable, don't you? I continued, my voice rising. You've built your life on manipulation and deceit, convinced you could walk all over people without facing the consequences. But not this time. I pulled out another envelope, this one filled with documents, financial statements, fraudulent contracts, all the evidence I'd gathered on Ethan's shady business dealings. I tossed it onto the table in front of him. Go ahead, Ethan. Explain to everyone how you've been stealing from your clients, cooking the books, cutting corners. His face flushed with anger, and for a moment I thought he might lash out. But instead, he just stood there, fists clenched, jaw tight, as the weight of my words sank in. The room was silent again, every eye on Ethan now, waiting for him to speak, to defend himself, but there was nothing he could say. I had backed him into a corner, and he knew it. I could turn all of this over to the police, I said, my voice steady, my gaze locked on his. I could destroy what's left of your life, your reputation. You'd be lucky to walk away without prison time. Ashley let out a small, broken sob from behind me, and I could hear her pleading under her breath, Michael, please stop. But I didn't stop. I had come too far, and I wasn't finished yet. I turned back to Ethan, my voice cold, final. But I'm not going to turn you in, not if you do exactly as I say. He looked up, eyes narrowing in suspicion. What do you want? I want you gone, I said. I want you to sell your house, pack up whatever's left of your life, and disappear. Leave town. Don't come back. And if you do, then I won't hesitate to hand all of this over to the authorities. You'll lose everything. Ethan stared at me, his face a mask of rage, but there was fear underneath it. He knew I had him. He had no other option. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded, his shoulders sagging in defeat. I'll leave, he muttered. I'll sell the house. The tension in the room shifted, the crowd watching in stunned silence as Ethan, the once proud, arrogant neighbor, stood there, broken, defeated. It was over. I turned back to Ashley, who had sunk into a chair, her face buried in her hands, her body shaking with sobs. She didn't look up, didn't try to speak. She knew it was over too. Everything she had tried to hold on to, the life she had built on lies and deception, was crumbling around her, and there was nothing left for her to cling to. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of something, pity, maybe. But it passed quickly, replaced by the cold satisfaction of knowing I had taken control, that I had made them pay. Ashley had lost everything, her marriage, her reputation, her lover. And Ethan, he was ruined. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. The room was silent, the weight of what had just happened hanging heavy in the air. It was done. I walked out of the gathering without saying another word, the cool night air hitting my face as I stepped outside. I could still hear the low murmurs from the house behind me, people processing what they had just witnessed, the shock slowly giving way to understanding. I had won. I had destroyed them. But as I walked home, the satisfaction I had expected to feel wasn't there. Instead, there was an emptiness, a hollowness that I couldn't shake. I had taken everything from them, but it hadn't brought me the closure I thought it would. The victory was mine, but at what cost? I entered the quiet of my house, the silence pressing in on me. Ashley wouldn't be coming back. Ethan would be gone soon. The neighborhood would move on to the next piece of gossip, the next scandal. And I was left with nothing but the wreckage of my own life. The revenge had consumed me, left me hollow, and now that it was over, I wasn't sure what was left. I stood in the living room for a long time, staring out the window, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Revenge had felt like the answer, but now it felt like a trap. The question lingered, hanging in the quiet. What now? I had won, but I had also lost, and the bitterness of that truth was something I wasn't ready to face. I stood in the living room that night, staring at the blank walls of a house that had once been a home. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that wasn't comforting, but heavy. Heavy, like a thick fog I couldn't escape. My thoughts swirled, the echoes of everything that had just happened crashing in waves inside my head. I had destroyed them. Ashley, Ethan, they were in ruins. And me? I had gotten what I wanted. But as I stood there, alone, the satisfaction I thought I'd feel was nowhere to be found. The next morning, I walked through the neighborhood trying to clear my mind, but every familiar sight seemed tainted. The friendly waves from the neighbors felt forced, tinged with the knowledge of the scandal that had torn through our small community. They all knew what had happened, but no one would say a word. That was how it worked around here. People loved to gossip, but when it came down to the truth, they preferred to pretend they hadn't been part of it. I felt the weight of their stares as I passed by. Some of them pitied me. Others were probably grateful that the drama had happened to someone else and not them. I kept walking, my feet moving automatically, but my mind was far away, trapped in the aftermath of what I'd done. I'd spent weeks, months even, crafting my revenge. I'd taken every step with precision, turning their betrayal into a public spectacle. And for what? To reclaim my dignity? To prove I wasn't the fool they thought I was? I had done all of that. I'd torn down their lives, stripped away their lies, and left them with nothing but the ashes of their own deception. And yet, the victory felt hollow. The revenge that had consumed me, that had been the only thing driving me for so long, left nothing but a bitter taste in my mouth now that it was over. I returned home and stood at the doorway for a long time, staring at the place where Ashley and I had built our life together. The house felt foreign, like I was standing in someone else's space. The memories, the years, everything we had shared, it had all unraveled in a matter of months. Now it was just a shell. The life we had lived here was gone, and I didn't know what was left of me. That night I couldn't sleep. The weight of what I'd done settled in my chest like a stone. I kept thinking about Ashley's face when she had crumbled in the kitchen, pleading with me, and Ethan's hollow, defeated nod as he agreed to leave town. I'd won, but it hadn't fixed anything inside me. I'd imagined that seeing them broken would somehow make me whole again, but all it had done was leave me with more questions than answers. I needed to get out, away from this house, away from this neighborhood. The next morning, I called a realtor. Selling the house happened faster than I expected. Maybe it was the market, or maybe I just wanted to be done with it, to cut ties with a place that had become a graveyard of memories. I walked through the empty rooms one last time before I left, the echo of my footsteps following me down the hall. I didn't feel anything anymore. Not anger, not sadness, just a numbness that had settled deep in my bones. As I drove out of the neighborhood for the last time, I watched the houses pass by through the rearview mirror. This place, which had once been the center of my world, was now just another chapter I was leaving behind. I didn't know where I was going yet, but it didn't matter. Anywhere was better than here. I spent the next few weeks drifting, trying to figure out what came next. The routine I had built my life around, work, marriage, the neighborhood barbecues, it had all crumbled, and I had no idea what to replace it with. For the first time in years, I was truly alone. I found myself thinking about Sarah, Ethan's wife. I hadn't spoken to her since that night, and I wondered what had happened to her. She had been a casualty of all this, just like me. Maybe I should have reached out, offered some kind of explanation. But what would I have said? That I had dragged her into my need for revenge? That I hadn't cared about the collateral damage as long as I got what I wanted? The truth was, I didn't know how to move forward. Revenge had consumed me, and now that it was over, I was left with nothing. I had spent so much time focused on destroying them that I hadn't thought about what would happen after. But as the days passed, something started to shift toward me. It wasn't immediate, more like a gradual realization that maybe, just maybe, I could start again. The past was gone. The life I had built with Ashley was over. But that didn't mean I had to be stuck here, trapped in the wreckage of what we had been. One morning as I stood at the window of my new apartment, watching the sun rise over the city, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was faint, barely a whisper, but it was there. I didn't have a plan yet, didn't know exactly where I was heading, but for the first time in months, I wasn't weighed down by the bitterness of betrayal. I decided to start small. I went back to work, throwing myself into the job that had once been a source of pride for me. It felt good to have something to focus on, something that wasn't tied to Ashley or Ethan. I began picking up old hobbies, running, reading, things I had let slip away during the chaos of the past year. Slowly, I was rebuilding piece by piece. One afternoon, I found myself driving through the city, aimless, but at peace. I pulled up to a park, the same one Ashley and I had visited when we first moved in together all those years ago. I sat on a bench and watched as people passed by. Couples, families, people who hadn't been through what I had. They didn't know my story, didn't know the pain that had shaped me, but that didn't matter. I was just another face in the crowd, and for the first time, that felt like a good thing. I took out my phone, scrolled through the contacts, and paused when I reached Sarah's name. I hadn't deleted it, though I had thought about it more than once. She'd probably moved on by now, tried to rebuild her own life after everything that had happened with Ethan. Maybe she had found a way to heal, to pick up the pieces. I typed out a message, something simple. "How are you doing?" Then stared at the screen. I didn't hit send. I didn't know if I ever would. Maybe some things were better left in the past. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, I realized something. I wasn't the same person I had been when all this started. I had been broken, shattered by betrayal, but I wasn't destroyed. I had survived. And while revenge had given me a sense of control in the moment, it hadn't healed the deeper wounds. That part, the healing, would take time, but I was ready for it. As I stood and walked back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in months. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I was okay with that. I had faced the darkness, let it consume me, and now, standing on the other side, I was ready to let go. I climbed into my car and pulled out of the lot, heading toward the horizon. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the road ahead of me. But beyond those shadows, I could see the light. The past was behind me now, and I wasn't looking back.